Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. The silence of the Alaskan wilderness can be deceptive. My name is Leland Thorpe, and in 2019 I was serving as a park ranger in Denali National Park and Preserve. Swapping the cacophony of city life for the whisper of pines felt like a fair trade, especially for someone like me who tells jokes that only squirrels seem to appreciate. I was 32 years old when I took the job, seeking a change of pace from my previous career as a software engineer in Seattle. The transition wasn't easy, but I quickly fell in love with the rugged beauty of Alaska. My days were a blend of routine patrols and the occasional rescue of lost hikers who thought their smartphone's GPS could outsmart nature. I enjoyed the simplicity of my new life, just me, the trees, and the endless expanse of untamed terrain. On a good day, the most excitement I'd encounter was a moose blocking the trail, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge right-of-way. Little did I know that this peaceful existence was about to be shattered in ways I could never have imagined. The vastness of Denali can be overwhelming to the uninitiated. 6 million acres of wild land bisected by a single road. Mountains, forests, and tundra stretch as far as the eye can see. It's a place where you can truly feel small in the face of nature's grandeur, but it's also a place where the line between beauty and danger is razor thin. I remember the day everything changed as if it were yesterday. It was early June and the park was just beginning to shake off the last vestiges of winter. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. I had been up since dawn, preparing for what I thought would be a routine day of patrolling the park's backcountry. As I stepped out of my cabin that morning, I paused to take in the view. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional chirp of an early rising bird. It was moments like these that made me grateful for my decision to leave the city behind. I made my way to the ranger station, my boots crunching on the gravel path. The station was a sturdy log building designed to withstand the harsh Alaskan winters. Inside, I found my colleague, Greg Hartman, already poring over maps spread across a large table. "Morning, Leland," Greg grunted, not looking up from his work. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." I poured myself a cup, grimacing at the bitter taste. Greg's coffee was notorious among the rangers. It could probably strip paint off walls. "Thanks, Greg. Nothing like your coffee to remind me why I cherish solitude," I quipped. Greg finally looked up, a wry smile on his weathered face. "You look like you wrestled a bear and lost, Thorpe. Rough night?" I shrugged, running a hand through my disheveled hair. "Just the usual. Woke up to a family of raccoons having a party on my roof. I swear they were doing the cha-cha." Greg chuckled, shaking his head. "Only you could find humor in sleep deprivation, Leland. But listen, we've got a situation that needs our attention." The change in his tone immediately put me on alert. Greg wasn't one for dramatics, so if he was concerned, it was worth paying attention to. I pulled up a chair, my earlier fatigue forgotten. "What's going on?" I asked, leaning in to study the map he was examining. Greg pointed to a remote area of the park, deep in the backcountry. "We've got a group of researchers out here studying the effects of climate change on the permafrost. They were supposed to check in daily, but we haven't heard from them in 3 days." I frowned, a feeling of unease settling in my stomach. That's not like Dr. Reynolds. She's usually meticulous about following protocols. Dr. Amelia Reynolds was a respected climate scientist who had been conducting research in Denali for the past 5 years. She led a team of 4 other researchers, all experienced in wilderness survival and well-versed in the park's safety procedures. Greg nodded grimly. "Exactly. We've tried reaching them on all frequencies, but there's been no response. It could be equipment failure, but 3 days is a long time to go without contact," I finished for him. "What's the plan?" "You and I are going to head out there and check on them," Greg said, tracing a route on the map. "It's about a 4-hour ATV ride to their last known location. We'll bring emergency supplies and extra communication equipment." I nodded, my mind already racing through the preparations we'd need to make. "When do we leave?" "As soon as we can get packed up," Greg replied, rolling up the map. I've already informed headquarters. They're on standby if we need additional support. As we gathered our gear and loaded up the ATVs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to step into something far beyond our usual scope of work. The Alaskan wilderness, beautiful as it was, held secrets and dangers that even experienced rangers like us couldn't always predict. Little did I know that this day would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. As we set out on the trail, the sun now high in the sky, I couldn't have imagined the horrors that awaited us in the deceptive silence of the Denali wilderness. The ATV engines roared to life, shattering the morning calm. Greg took the lead and I followed close behind as we set out on the winding trail that would take us deep into the Denali backcountry. The path was rough, cutting through dense forests and skirting the edges of icy streams. As we traveled, the landscape gradually changed. The relatively gentle terrain near the ranger station gave way to more rugged topography. Massive boulders left behind by ancient glaciers dotted the landscape. The trees grew sparser and the air became noticeably cooler. About 2 hours into our journey, we stopped to rest and check our bearings. I pulled out a granola bar, more out of habit than hunger. The uneasy feeling in my stomach had only grown stronger as we'd ventured further from civilization. "You're awfully quiet, Leland," Greg observed, taking a swig from his water bottle. "No jokes about bears wearing hiking boots or moose with GPS?" I managed a weak smile. "Sorry, Greg. I guess I'm just worried about Dr. Reynolds and her team. It's not like them to go off the grid like this." Greg nodded, his expression serious. "I know what you mean. I've worked with Amelia for years. She's one of the most responsible researchers I've ever met. For her to miss check-ins, it doesn't sit right." As if to punctuate his words, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was a low, mournful howl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. "What was that?" I asked, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt. Greg frowned, scanning the surrounding forest. "Probably just the wind playing tricks on us. These canyons can create some strange acoustics." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. But deep down, a primal part of me recognized that sound for what it was, a warning. We remounted our ATVs and continued on. The trail narrowed, forcing us to slow our pace. The canopy above thickened, casting intricate patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. It was beautiful in an eerie sort of way, but I found myself longing for the open spaces we'd left behind. As we rounded a bend, Greg suddenly held up his hand, signaling me to stop. He cut his engine and I did the same. In the sudden silence, I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. "Look," Greg whispered, pointing to the ground beside the trail. I dismounted and crouched down to examine what had caught his attention. There, in the soft earth, was a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were large, easily twice the size of a bear's paw print, with long, curved claw marks extending from each toe. "What could have made these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Greg shook his head, his face pale. "I've been a ranger for 20 years, Leland. I've tracked every animal in this park, but this, I've never seen anything like it." A twig snapped in the forest to our right, and we both whirled around, Greg's hand on his rifle, mine on my bear spray. For a long moment we stood frozen, straining our eyes to penetrate the dense undergrowth, but whatever had made the noise didn't reveal itself. "We should keep moving," Greg said at last, his voice tight. "We're still a good hour from the research camp." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to put some distance between us and whatever had left those tracks. As we continued on, I found myself constantly scanning the trees, jumping at every shadow and rustle of leaves. The trail began to climb, leading us up into higher elevations. The air grew thin, and a light mist settled around us, reducing visibility. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring to unsettle us, playing on our deepest fears. "Greg," I called out, having to raise my voice over the ATV engines, "maybe we should radio for backup, if there's something dangerous out here." He slowed, allowing me to pull up alongside him. "You might be right," he admitted. "Let's try to make contact when we reach the next clearing. We should have better reception there." But as we crested the hill instead of a clearing, we found ourselves facing a scene that stopped us cold. The trail ahead was blocked by a massive tree, its trunk easily 4 feet in diameter, lying across the path. But it wasn't the fallen tree itself that sent a chill down my spine. It was the way it had fallen. The tree hadn't been uprooted by wind or struck by lightning. It looked as if it had been snapped off at the base, like a twig broken by a child. The jagged stump left behind bore deep gouges, as if something with immense strength had gripped the tree and torn it from the earth. Greg and I exchanged a look of disbelief and growing fear. Whatever had done this was no ordinary animal. It was something powerful, something dangerous, and something that was almost certainly still out there in the mist-shrouded forest. As we contemplated our next move, that same mournful howl echoed through the trees, closer this time, much closer. And in that moment I realized that our routine mission had just become a fight for survival. The howl faded, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to press against my eardrums. Greg and I remained motionless, our eyes locked on the fallen tree and the devastation around it. The mist swirled, creating ghostly shapes that seemed to dance at the edges of my vision. "We need to turn back," I whispered, my mouth dry with fear. "Whatever did this?" Greg shook his head, his jaw set in a grim line. "We can't, Leland. Dr. Reynolds and her team are still out there. If there's something dangerous in these woods, they could be in even greater danger than we are." I knew he was right, but every instinct in my body was screaming at me to flee. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Okay," I said at last, "but we do this smart. We radio for backup right now and we proceed on foot. The ATVs are too noisy. We need to be able to hear what's coming." Greg nodded, reaching for his radio. He flipped it on and we were immediately greeted by a burst of static. "Ranger Station, this is Hartman. Do you copy? Over." More static. Greg tried again, adjusting the frequency. Still nothing but the hiss of dead air. "Damn," he muttered. "Must be interference from the terrain. We'll try again when we reach higher ground." We secured the ATVs and gathered what supplies we could carry. Greg checked his rifle and I made sure my bear spray was easily accessible. As an afterthought, I grabbed the small hatchet from my ATV's toolkit. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little less defenseless. We set out on foot, skirting around the fallen tree. The mist had thickened, reducing visibility to barely 20 feet ahead. Sounds seemed muffled, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere that pressed in from all sides. As we walked, I noticed other signs of disturbance. Branches were snapped off high in the trees, far higher than any bear could reach. Deep furrows were gouged into the earth, as if something massive had passed through recently. "Greg," I whispered, pointing to a nearby tree, "look at this." The trunk was marred by a series of deep gashes, each easily 6 inches long. They were fresh, the sap still oozing from the wounds. Greg ran his hand over the marks, his face grim. "These were made recently. Whatever did this, it's still in the area." A twig snapped somewhere in the mist to our left. We both froze, straining our ears. For a moment there was nothing, then a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. "Run," Greg hissed, and we took off down the trail. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us I could hear something large moving through the forest, keeping pace effortlessly. The growl came again, louder this time, filled with a primal hunger that sent a spike of terror through me. "There," Greg shouted, pointing ahead. Through the mist I could make out the dim outlines of structures, the research camp. We put on an extra burst of speed, desperate to reach the relative safety of the camp. As we burst into the clearing, the sight that greeted us stopped us in our tracks. The camp was in shambles. Tents were shredded, equipment scattered everywhere. It looked as if a tornado had torn through the site. "Dr. Reynolds," Greg called out. "Dr. Reynolds, are you here?" Only silence answered. We moved cautiously into the camp, alert for any sign of the researchers or the creature that had been pursuing us. The eerie quiet was broken only by the sound of canvas flapping in the breeze. I approached one of the less damaged tents, pulling back the flap to peer inside. The sleeping bag was shredded, and dark stains that looked horribly like dried blood spattered the fabric. "Greg," I called, my voice shaking. I think they might be dead." He joined me, his face pale as he took in the scene. "We don't know that for sure. They could have escaped. We need to—" His words were cut off by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. It was human, filled with terror and pain, and it was close. Without a word, we both took off in the direction of the sound. The mist seemed to part before us, revealing a small ravine just beyond the edge of the camp. As we reached the lip of the ravine, the screaming stopped abruptly. What I saw in that ravine would haunt me for the rest of my life. A figure stood hunched over a crumpled form on the ground. But it wasn't human. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in matted fur. As it turned to face us, I caught a glimpse of a muzzle filled with razor-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed with an unnatural, intelligent malevolence. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then the creature let out a roar that shook the very ground beneath our feet. Greg raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the monster charged. I didn't think. I just acted. I shoved Greg hard, sending him stumbling back just as the creature reached us. Its massive claws swiped through the air where Greg had been standing a split second before. "Run!" I yelled, already scrambling backward. We turned and fled back toward the camp, the sound of the creature's pursuit spurring us on. I could hear its heavy breathing, feel the ground shaking with each of its strides. As we reached the camp, Greg suddenly veered off toward one of the larger tents. "In here," he shouted. I followed him, diving through the tent flap. Inside, Greg was already pushing over a heavy metal cabinet barricading the entrance. Not a moment too soon. The creature slammed into the tent, its claws ripping through the fabric like tissue paper. We pressed ourselves against the far wall of the tent, watching in horror as the creature tore at the tent. The metal cabinet groaned under the onslaught, but miraculously held. "What is that thing?" I gasped, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Greg shook his head, his face ashen. "I don't know, I've never seen anything like it, but we need to find a way out of here." I looked around frantically, searching for anything we could use as a weapon or an escape route. The tent was filled with research equipment, computers, sample containers, and various scientific instruments. Nothing that could help us against the monster outside. The creature's attacks on the tent intensified, each impact threatening to tear through our flimsy shelter. I could hear its frustrated roars, smell its rank, musky odor seeping through the tears in the fabric. "The back," Greg whispered suddenly. "There's a small tear. If we can widen it—" I nodded, understanding immediately. While the creature was focused on the front of the tent, we might have a chance to slip out the back. I grabbed a nearby pair of scissors from a workstation and began carefully widening the tear, trying to make as little noise as possible. Just as I made the opening large enough for us to squeeze through, the creature let out a deafening roar. The sound of rending metal filled the air as the cabinet finally gave way. "Go!" Greg yelled, pushing me toward the opening. I scrambled through, my clothes catching on the jagged edges of the tear. I heard Greg right behind me, followed by an enraged bellow from the creature, as it realized its prey was escaping. We emerged into the misty forest, running blindly. Behind us, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, gaining on us with every stride. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. Suddenly, the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. Greg and I tumbled down a steep embankment, rolling through mud and leaves. We came to a stop at the bottom, battered and bruised, but alive. "Quick," Greg hissed, pulling me into the hollow beneath a fallen tree. We huddled there, scarcely daring to breathe as the sound of the creature's pursuit grew closer. Its heavy footsteps paused at the top of the embankment. I could hear it sniffing the air, searching for our scent. For what seemed like an eternity, we remained motionless, pressed against each other in the cramped space beneath the log. My entire body trembled with fear and exhaustion. Finally, after what must have been hours but felt like days, the sounds of the creature faded into the distance. Only then did I allow myself to take a deep, shuddering breath. "We need to move," Greg whispered. "It could come back at any moment." Slowly, painfully, we crawled out from our hiding place. The forest was dark now, night having fallen while we hid. The mist had cleared somewhat, revealing a sky studded with stars. "Which way?" I asked, trying to get my bearings. Greg pointed to a faint glow on the horizon. "That's the direction of the ranger station. It's a long walk, but it's our best chance." As we set out, picking our way carefully through the dark forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. "Greg," I said quietly as we walked, "what about Dr. Reynolds and her team?" He was silent for a long moment before responding. "We can't help them now, Leland. Our priority has to be getting back and reporting what we've seen. We need to warn people about what's out here." I nodded, knowing he was right, but hating the feeling of abandoning the researchers. As we continued our long trek back to civilization, I couldn't help but wonder, what was that creature? How long had it been out here? And most chillingly, were there more of them? The night stretched on, each step taking us closer to safety, but also deeper into a mystery that threatened to shatter everything we thought we knew about the wilderness we called home. The forest at night was a different world. Shadows danced in the periphery of our vision, and every sound seemed magnified. The crunch of leaves under our feet, the whisper of wind through the trees, the distant call of a night bird. All of it took on a sinister quality in the wake of what we'd witnessed. Greg and I walked in silence for the most part, each lost in our own thoughts. The adrenaline that had fueled our escape was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a growing awareness of our various cuts and bruises. "We should rest," Greg said at last, his voice hoarse. "We're no good to anyone if we collapse from exhaustion." I nodded, too tired to argue. We found a small clearing and settled down with our backs against a large boulder. It wasn't comfortable, but it offered some protection and a clear view of our surroundings. As we sat there, catching our breath and taking sips from our nearly empty water bottles, I found myself replaying the events of the day in my mind. The destroyed camp, the horrifying creature, the scream we'd heard. It all seemed like a nightmare, but the aches in my body and the tears in my clothing were very real reminders of the danger we'd faced. "Greg," I said quietly, "what do you think happened to Dr. Reynolds and her team?" He was silent for a long moment, staring out into the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with grief and guilt. "I've known Amelia for years. She's tough as nails and smart as a whip. If anyone could have survived an encounter with that thing, it would be her. But after what we saw at the camp..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew the likelihood of finding any survivors was slim to none. "What was that creature?" I asked, voicing the question that had been gnawing at me since our encounter. "I've never seen anything like it in all my time as a ranger." Greg shook his head. "I don't know, Leland. It was like something out of a horror movie, but it was real, and it was here in our park." A thought occurred to me then, one that sent a chill down my spine. "Do you think? Could it be connected to the climate research Dr. Reynolds was doing? Maybe they uncovered something in the permafrost." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Greg cautioned. "Right now, our priority is getting back to the ranger station and reporting what we've seen. We can speculate about origins later." I nodded, knowing he was right. But as we lapsed back into silence, my mind couldn't help but race with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. We must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I knew I was jerking awake to the sound of a twig snapping nearby. The sky had lightened slightly. Dawn wasn't far off. Greg was already alert, his hand on his rifle. We exchanged a glance, both straining our ears for any further sounds. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to suggest we get moving, we heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "It found us," I whispered, my heart hammering in my chest. Greg nodded grimly. "We need to move, now." We got to our feet as quietly as we could, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows, turning every bush and tree into a potential hiding place for our pursuer. We set off at a brisk pace, no longer trying to be stealthy. Speed was our only hope now. As we moved, I could hear something crashing through the underbrush behind us, gaining ground with every second. "There!" Greg shouted suddenly, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I could make out the outline of a small structure, an old trapper's cabin, long abandoned but still standing. It wasn't much, but it was our only chance. We sprinted towards it, the sound of our pursuer growing louder with each step. Just as we reached the cabin, I heard a roar that made my blood run cold. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was there, at the edge of the clearing, its massive form silhouetted against the lightening sky. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural pale light, fixed on us with predatory intensity. Greg reached the cabin first, yanking open the door. "Get inside," he yelled. I didn't need to be told twice. I dove through the doorway, Greg right behind me. He slammed the door shut just as the creature reached the cabin, its bulk slamming against the wooden walls with enough force to make the entire structure shudder. We pressed ourselves against the far wall, watching in horror as the creature's claws tore at the door. The old wood groaned and splintered under the onslaught. "The windows," Greg gasped. "Help me block them." We scrambled to push what little furniture remained in the cabin, an old table, a few chairs, in front of the windows. It wouldn't hold the creature back for long, but it might buy us a few precious moments. As we worked, I couldn't help but wonder, was this how it would end? Torn apart by some unknown monster in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere? The thought filled me with a mixture of terror and a strange sort of resignation. The creature's attacks on the cabin intensified, each impact threatening to bring the whole structure down around us. Greg and I huddled in the center of the room, our backs to each other, weapons at the ready. If we were going down, we were going down fighting. Just when it seemed the cabin couldn't take much more, a new sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive whump 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 of helicopter rotors. The creature paused in its assault, letting out a confused growl. Then, with a final roar of frustration, it retreated. We could hear it crashing back into the forest, moving away from the approaching aircraft. Greg and I looked at each other in disbelief. Had we just been saved by sheer luck? We cautiously approached one of the windows, peering out into the clearing. The sky was fully light now, and we could see a Park Service helicopter descending, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. As the helicopter touched down, armed rangers poured out, quickly securing the area. Among them, I recognized the stern figure of Chief Ranger Martin Walsh. Greg threw open the cabin door, waving to attract their attention. "Over here," he called out. As the rangers rushed towards us, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We were safe, at least for the moment. But as I watched Chief Walsh's face grow grave as Greg began to recount our harrowing experience, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. Whatever that creature was, wherever it had come from, it was still out there in the wilderness. And something told me that this was just the beginning of a mystery that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the natural world. The helicopter ride back to park headquarters was a blur. Greg and I sat in stunned silence, still processing the horrors we'd witnessed. The other rangers cast worried glances our way, clearly unsettled by our battered appearance and shell-shocked demeanor. Chief Walsh sat across from us, his weathered face set in a grim expression. "I need you both to tell me exactly what happened out there," he said, having to raise his voice over the sound of the rotors. "Leave nothing out, no matter how unbelievable it might seem." Greg and I exchanged a look. How could we possibly explain what we'd seen? It all seemed so fantastical in the harsh light of day, removed from the terror of the moment. But we tried. We recounted everything. The destroyed research camp, the monstrous creature, our desperate flight through the forest. With each detail, Chief Walsh's frown deepened. "And you're certain about the size of this animal?" he asked when we'd finished. I nodded emphatically. "At least 8 feet tall, Chief, maybe more, and it moved faster than anything that big has a right to." Walsh leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We'll need to organize a search party for Dr. Reynolds and her team, and we'll have to close off that section of the park until we can figure out what's going on." "With all due respect, Chief," Greg interjected, "a standard search party isn't going to cut it. Not against that thing. We need serious firepower." Walsh held up a hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now, our priority is finding those missing researchers. We'll deal with this creature, if and when we encounter it." I could tell from his tone that he didn't fully believe our story. Part of me couldn't blame him. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'm not sure I would have believed it either. As we neared the ranger station, I could see a crowd gathered on the landing pad. News traveled fast in a small community like ours, and it was clear that word of our emergency evacuation had spread. The moment we touched down, we were swarmed by worried colleagues and friends. Their questions came rapid fire, a cacophony of concern and curiosity. "What happened out there? Are you guys okay? Did you find Dr. Reynolds?" Chief Walsh shouldered his way through the crowd. "All right, everyone back up. Give them some space. Thorpe, Hartman, my office. Now. We followed Walsh through the throng, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed us. As we entered the chief's office, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. I hardly recognized myself. My clothes were torn and mud-stained, my face scratched and pale. No wonder everyone was staring. Walsh closed the door behind us, muffling the buzz of voices outside. He settled behind his desk with a heavy sigh. All right, let's go through this one more time. I need every detail, no matter how small. For the next hour, Greg and I relived our nightmare, answering Walsh's probing questions as best we could. With each retelling, the experience seemed to grow more surreal, more impossible. I know how this sounds, Chief, I said at last, my voice hoarse from talking. If I hadn't been there, I'm not sure I'd believe it myself. But I'm telling you, that thing out there, it's like nothing we've ever dealt with before. Walsh was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. Finally, he spoke. I've known both of you for years. You're good rangers, level-headed. Not the type to panic or exaggerate, but what you're describing, it's hard to swallow. We understand that, sir, Greg said, but with all due respect, we know what we saw. And right now there are 5 researchers out there who are either dead or in serious danger. We need to act. Walsh nodded slowly. You're right about that, at least. I'll put together a search and rescue team. We'll comb that entire area. And the creature? I asked. We'll keep an eye out for any large predators, Walsh said carefully. But let's focus on finding Dr. Reynolds and her team for now. It was clear from his tone that he still didn't fully believe our account of the monster, but at least he was taking action. It would have to be enough for now. As we left Walsh's office, we were immediately cornered by Karen Chen, the park's wildlife biologist. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of concern and barely contained excitement. Is it true? She asked in a hushed voice. The rumors about some kind of new predator? I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But Karen had always been a voice of reason in the park, someone who valued scientific inquiry over sensationalism. It's complicated, I said at last. We saw something out there, Karen, something big, but we don't know what it was. Her eyes lit up with curiosity. Describe it to me, every detail you can remember. As Greg and I recounted our encounter once again, Karen's expression grew more and more serious. When we finished, she was silent for a long moment, her brow furrowed in thought. This is unprecedented, she said finally. If what you're describing is accurate, we could be dealing with an entirely new species, something that's managed to stay hidden in the park all this time. Or something that's recently been unleashed, Greg muttered darkly. Karen shot him a sharp look. What do you mean by that? Greg shrugged, just thinking out loud. But doesn't it seem odd that this thing shows up right where Dr. Reynolds was conducting her climate research? What if they uncovered something in the permafrost? That's quite a leap, Karen said, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Still, it's an angle worth considering. I'd like to take a look at Dr. Reynolds' research notes, if we can find them. As Karen hurried off to speak with Chief Walsh, I turned to Greg. Do you really think there could be a connection between the creature and the climate research? He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I don't know, Leland, but something tells me the next few days passed in a blur of activity. Chief Walsh organized a large-scale search and rescue operation, bringing in additional rangers from neighboring parks and even calling in some military support. The official story released to the public was vague. A group of researchers had gone missing in a remote area of the park, possibly due to an encounter with an aggressive predator. Greg and I were initially sidelined, ordered to rest and recover from our ordeal. But after a day of restless pacing and sleepless nights filled with nightmares, we convinced Walsh to let us join the search efforts. You two know the area better than anyone, he conceded reluctantly. But you stay with your assigned teams at all times, understood? No heroics. We nodded our agreement, eager to get back out there. As much as the thought of encountering that creature again terrified me, the need to find Dr. Reynolds and her team, or at least discover what had happened to them, overrode my fear. The search area was vast, covering several square miles of rugged terrain. Teams were assigned to grid patterns, methodically combing through the wilderness. Helicopters buzzed overhead, using thermal imaging to search for any signs of life. Greg and I were paired with a team that included Karen Chen and 2 experienced trackers from a neighboring national park. As we set out, I couldn't help but notice the skeptical looks the trackers gave us when they thought we weren't looking. Clearly, they'd heard the rumors about our monster encounter and didn't put much stock in them. We spent hours pushing through dense underbrush, scaling rocky outcroppings and wading through icy streams. Every so often, we'd come across signs of disturbance, a broken branch here, an unusual track there, but nothing conclusive. As the day wore on, I found myself jumping at every shadow, every rustle in the undergrowth. The forest that had once been my sanctuary now felt alien and menacing. I could tell from the tense set of Greg's shoulders that he felt the same way. It was late afternoon when we made our first significant discovery. Karen, who had been examining the ground near a small clearing, suddenly called out, "Over here, I found something." We rushed over to find her crouched next to a patch of disturbed earth. As we drew closer, I saw what had caught her attention, a torn piece of fabric, partially buried in the mud. Karen carefully extracted it, holding it up for us to see. It was a scrap of bright orange material, the same color as the safety vests worn by Dr. Reynolds' team. "It's recent," one of the trackers said, examining the mud around where the fabric had been found. "Within the last few days, I'd say." A mixture of hope and dread surged through me. This was the first concrete evidence we'd found of the missing researchers. But the way the fabric was torn, the traces of what looked disturbingly like dried blood on its edges, it didn't bode well. "We should radio this in," Greg said, already reaching for his communicator. As he relayed our discovery to base camp, I scanned the surrounding area, looking for any other signs of disturbance. That's when I saw it. A series of deep gouges in the trunk of a nearby tree, about 7 feet off the ground. "Guys," I called out, my voice shaking slightly, "look at this." The others gathered around, staring at the marks with a mixture of awe and fear. "Those weren't made by any bear," one of the trackers muttered, his earlier skepticism evaporating in the face of this evidence. Karen ran her hand over the gouges, her scientific curiosity overriding any sense of caution. "The depth and spacing of these marks, they're consistent with your description of the creature, Leland." A twig snapped in the forest behind us, and we all whirled around, suddenly on high alert. For a tense moment we stood frozen, straining our ears for any further sound. "We should keep moving," Greg said at last, his voice low. "If that thing is still in the area, we don't want to be here after dark." No one argued. We continued our search with renewed urgency, all too aware of the lengthening shadows as the sun began to dip towards the horizon. As twilight settled over the forest, we made our way back to the temporary base camp that had been set up for the search teams. The mood was somber. None of the other teams had found any sign of the missing researchers. Over a meager dinner of MREs, we shared our discoveries with Chief Walsh and the other team leaders. The scrap of fabric and the claw marks generated a lot of discussion, but no concrete conclusions. "We'll expand the search area tomorrow," Walsh announced. "Dr. Chen, I want you to take a team back to that location in the morning. See if you can find any other evidence that might help us track this animal." I noticed he carefully avoided using the word creature or monster. Despite the mounting evidence, there was still a reluctance to fully accept the reality of what Greg and I had seen. As the meeting broke up and people began to retire to their tents, Karen pulled Greg and me aside. "There's something I need to show you," she said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It's about Dr. Reynolds' research." Intrigued and a little apprehensive, we followed her to her tent. Inside, she pulled out a laptop and some papers. "I managed to access some of Amelia's preliminary findings," she explained, booting up the computer. "Most of her data is still out there at the research site, but she had been sending regular updates back to the university." "And," Greg prompted, "did you find anything unusual?" Karen nodded, her face grave. Amelia's team wasn't just studying the effects of climate change on the permafrost. They were investigating anomalies, areas where the permafrost was melting far faster than it should be, releasing gases and other things that had been trapped for millennia. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Greg's earlier speculation about something being released from the ice. "What kind of other things?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Karen pulled up a series of graphs and charts on her laptop. Organic material mostly, but some of it, well, Amelia couldn't identify it. She sent samples back to the lab for analysis, but the results were inconclusive. Whatever it was, it didn't match anything in their databases. Greg and I exchanged a look of growing unease. "You think this could be connected to the creature we saw?" I asked. Karen hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I think it's a possibility we can't ignore. If something has been preserved in the permafrost for thousands of years, something that predates our understanding of the ecosystem here, who knows what it could be capable of?" As I lay in my tent that night, sleep eluding me, I couldn't shake the implications of what Karen had shared. The idea that our warming planet could be unleashing ancient horrors, long trapped in the ice. It was like something out of a science fiction novel. But after what I'd seen, I couldn't dismiss it. I drifted off eventually, my dreams filled with visions of monstrous shapes emerging from melting glaciers, their roars echoing across a landscape irrevocably changed by the folly of man. The next morning dawned cold and misty, the forest shrouded in a ghostly haze that seemed to muffle all sound. As our team prepared to head back out, there was a palpable tension in the air. The discoveries of the previous day had shaken everyone's skepticism, replacing it with a wary alertness that bordered on paranoia. Karen led our group back to the site where we'd found the scrap of fabric and the claw marks. She was armed with an array of scientific equipment, sample collection kits, a portable spectrometer, even a small drone for aerial surveying. "We're not just looking for signs of the missing researchers today," she explained as we hiked. "We need to gather as much data as we can about the environment here. Soil samples, air quality readings, anything that might give us a clue about what's really going on." As we neared the clearing, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. The forest seemed too quiet, the mist too thick. Every shadow held the potential for danger. We spread out to search the area more thoroughly, always keeping each other in sight. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a monstrous shape looming out of the mist. It was Greg who made the next significant discovery. "Over here," he called out, his voice tight with excitement and fear. We converged on his position to find him standing at the edge of a small ravine. As we drew closer, I saw what had caught his attention, a series of massive footprints leading down into the gully. "Those match what we saw before," I said, my mouth dry. "But they're even bigger." Karen quickly set up her equipment, taking measurements and samples from the tracks. The depth and shape of these prints, they're consistent with a biped, but the size and the claw marks, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. One of the trackers, a man named Mike, who had been quietly skeptical up to this point, spoke up. "Look at the spacing between the prints. Whatever made these was moving fast, really fast." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the creature's terrifying speed during our encounter. "Which direction was it heading?" I asked, dreading the answer. Mike pointed down into the ravine. "That way, towards the area where Dr. Reynolds' team was conducting their primary research." We exchanged grim looks. If the creature was somehow connected to the climate anomalies Dr. Reynolds had been investigating, it made a twisted kind of sense that it would be drawn to that area. "We need to follow these tracks," Karen said, already packing up her equipment. "If we can find the creature's lair, or at least its primary hunting grounds, we might be able to figure out what we're dealing with." Part of me wanted to argue, to suggest we head back to base camp and call in more support. But I knew Karen was right. We needed answers, and this was our best lead. As we carefully made our way down into the ravine, following the massive tracks, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into the belly of the beast. The terrain grew more rugged as we descended, the mist thickening around us. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I found myself shivering despite the exertion of the hike. After about an hour of careful tracking, Mike held up a hand, signaling us to stop. "Look there," he whispered, pointing to a dark opening in the rock face ahead of us. It was a cave, its entrance partially obscured by fallen rocks and thick vegetation. But even from a distance I could see that the plants around the opening were crushed and broken, as if something large had recently passed through. "This could be it," Karen murmured, her scientific excitement warring with obvious apprehension. Greg unshouldered his rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded. "We should approach carefully, if that thing's in there." I nodded, my hand moving to the bear spray on my belt. It seemed woefully inadequate given what we were potentially facing, but it was better than nothing. As we crept closer to the cave entrance, a foul odor assailed us, a mixture of wet fur, rotting meat, and something else, something alien and indescribable. I fought the urge to gag, covering my nose and mouth with my sleeve. Karen pulled out a powerful flashlight, aiming it into the darkness of the cave. The beam illuminated a horrifying scene. The floor of the cave was littered with bones, some animal, some disturbingly human-like. Scraps of torn clothing were scattered about, and I recognized with a jolt the remains of the bright orange safety vests worn by Dr. Reynolds' team. "Oh God," I heard Mike mutter behind me. But it wasn't just the evidence of predation that made the scene so chilling. The walls of the cave were covered in a strange phosphorescent substance that seemed to pulse with an inner light. It clung to the rocks in thick strands, forming intricate patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Karen approached one of the walls, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. She reached out a gloved hand to touch the glowing substance. "Karen, wait," Greg started to say, but it was too late. The moment Karen's fingers made contact with the phosphorescent material, it reacted. The glow intensified, and a ripple seemed to pass through the substance, spreading out from the point of contact. And then we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. The cave trembled, small rocks and debris raining down from the ceiling. "We need to get out of here," I said, grabbing Karen's arm and pulling her back towards the entrance. "Now!" We scrambled out of the cave, our earlier caution forgotten in the face of immediate danger. As we emerged into the misty ravine, a roar split the air, a sound of primal rage that made my blood run cold. "Run!" Greg yelled, and we took off up the slope, slipping and stumbling in our haste. Behind us I could hear something massive crashing through the undergrowth, gaining on us with terrifying speed. The roars grew louder, filled with a hunger that sent spikes of terror through me. As we crested the top of the ravine, I risked a glance back. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The creature burst from the mist, its massive form even more terrifying in the daylight. It was easily 9 feet tall, covered in shaggy fur that seemed to shimmer with the same phosphorescent quality we'd seen in the cave. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, intelligent malevolence, fixed on us with predatory intensity. But what struck me most was its face. It wasn't the muzzle of a bear or any other animal I recognized. There was something almost human about its features, distorted and stretched into a nightmarish parody of a face. As the creature let out another ear-splitting roar, I realized with a sickening clarity that we were no longer the hunters. We were the prey. And our chances of survival were growing slimmer by the second. Our feet pounded against the forest floor as we ran, branches whipping at our faces and roots threatening to trip us with every step. The creature's roars echoed through the trees, spurring us on with primal fear. "The ATVs!" Greg shouted between labored breaths. "If we can reach them, we might have a chance." I nodded, not wasting breath on a response. Our vehicles were parked about a half-mile from our current position. It might as well have been 100 miles, given the speed at which our pursuer was gaining on us. Karen was lagging behind, her face pale with exertion and fear. Without thinking, I grabbed her arm, half dragging her along with us. Mike, the tracker, had taken the lead, his experience in the wilderness evident in the way he smoothly navigated the difficult terrain. A fallen tree loomed in our path. Mike and Greg vaulted over it easily, but as Karen and I approached, I knew she wouldn't make it. Making a split-second decision, I boosted her up and over, then dove and rolled beneath the massive trunk. As I scrambled to my feet on the other side, a deafening crash behind me announced the creature's arrival. It had simply barreled through the tree trunk, sending splinters and debris flying in all directions. "Keep going," I yelled, pushing Karen ahead of me. "Don't look back." But even as the words left my mouth, I found myself turning to face our pursuer. What I saw nearly stopped me in my tracks. The creature stood mere yards away, its massive chest heaving with exertion. In the daylight, I could see details I'd missed before. Its fur was matted and caked with mud and what looked horribly like dried blood. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed. They gleamed with an intelligence that seemed impossible for a mere animal. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The creature and I locked gazes, and I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with physical fear. There was something in those eyes, something that spoke of age, of patience, of a hunger that went beyond mere predation. The spell was broken by Greg's voice, harsh with desperation. "Leland, move!" I turned and ran, my legs burning with the effort. Ahead I could see a break in the trees. We were nearing the clearing where we'd left the ATVs. As we burst into the open space, I felt a surge of hope. The vehicles were there, untouched, our potential salvation. Greg reached them first, fumbling with the keys. "Get on!" he shouted, gunning the engine of the first ATV to life. Karen scrambled onto the back of Greg's vehicle, while Mike and I headed for the second ATV. I'd just swung my leg over the seat when a roar split the air, so close it made my ears ring. I turned to see the creature emerging from the tree line, its eyes fixed on us with terrifying focus. Without thinking, I grabbed for the rifle strapped to the side of the ATV. "Go!" I yelled to Mike as I brought the weapon to my shoulder. "I'll hold it off." Mike hesitated for only a second before gunning the engine, the ATV's tires spinning in the loose dirt as it shot forward. I took aim at the advancing creature, my hands steady despite the fear coursing through me. Time seemed to slow as I squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was deafening in the small clearing. The creature staggered as the bullet found its mark, dark blood blossoming on its shoulder, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar of pain and rage that shook the very ground beneath my feet. I fired again and again, each shot finding its target. But the creature kept coming, driven by a fury that seemed to override any sense of self-preservation. Just as I was certain I was about to be torn apart, the roar of an engine cut through the chaos. Greg had circled back, driving straight at the creature with reckless abandon. The ATV slammed into the monster's legs, sending it crashing to the ground with an earth-shaking thud. Greg barely managed to keep control of the vehicle, skidding to a stop beside me. "Get on," he yelled, his face a mask of determination and fear. I didn't need to be told twice. I leapt onto the back of the ATV, clinging to Greg as he gunned the engine. We shot forward, leaving the clearing and the fallen creature behind. As we raced through the forest, following the trail left by Mike's ATV, I kept expecting to hear the sound of pursuit. But there was nothing but the roar of the engine and the wind rushing past our ears. It wasn't until we reached the ranger station, bursting into the yard in a cloud of dust and exhaust, that I allowed myself to believe we might have actually escaped. Chief Walsh and a group of rangers rushed out to meet us, their faces a mix of relief and concern. "What happened out there?" Walsh demanded as we dismounted on shaky legs. "Where's the rest of your team?" Greg, his face pale beneath the dirt and scratches, spoke up. "Mike's ahead of us. He should be here any minute. But Chief, we found it. The creature. It's real, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen before." Walsh's expression darkened. "Inside. Now. I want a full report." As we followed Walsh into the station, I couldn't shake the memory of those intelligent ancient eyes. We had escaped, yes, but something told me this was far from over. Whatever that creature was, wherever it had come from, it was now a part of our world. And I had a sinking feeling that our encounter in the clearing was just the beginning of a much larger, much more terrifying story. The truth was out there, hidden in the melting permafrost and the dark caves of the Alaskan wilderness. And whether we were ready for it or not, that truth was clawing its way to the surface, bringing with it horrors beyond our wildest imaginations. As I settled in to give my report, I knew that my life and the lives of everyone in this small corner of Alaska would never be the same again. The wilderness I had once called home had become an alien landscape, hiding secrets that threatened to shatter our understanding of the natural world. And somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of Denali, a creature born of ancient ice and modern climate change was nursing its wounds, its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence as it planned its next move. The silence of the Alaskan wilderness had indeed been deceptive, and now that silence had been broken by a roar that would echo through our nightmares for years to come. I've always found peace in the rolling hills of Shenandoah National Park, where in 2019, at the age of 34, I spent most of my days patrolling the trails and ensuring visitors respected the land. My name is Ezekiel Harper, but most folks just call me Zeke. Growing up in a small Virginia town, I developed a love for the outdoors early on, thanks to my grandpa who taught me everything from fishing to identifying bird calls. Of course, I never quite mastered the art of starting a campfire without singeing my eyebrows, a talent that earned me a few laughs around the ranger station. Shenandoah National Park spans nearly 200,000 acres of protected wilderness, a tapestry of dense forests, cascading waterfalls, and serene meadows. It's a place where the chaos of the modern world fades away, replaced by the rhythmic songs of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the gentle Appalachian breeze. But as I would soon discover, even the most tranquil wilderness can harbor dark secrets. On a crisp October morning, the kind where your breath hangs in the air like a spectral reminder of summer's passing, I received my assignment for the day. I was to check the remote segments of the Appalachian Trail that wound through our park. The leaves were at their peak, painting the landscape in a riot of amber, crimson, and gold. Hikers from all over the country flocked to catch this autumn spectacle, their excited chatter filling the main trails and popular overlooks. As I prepared my gear for the day's patrol, my colleague Laura Jenkins joined me. Laura was a sharp-witted ranger with a penchant for bad puns and an uncanny ability to spot wildlife before anyone else. She once joked that between the two of us, we had one fully functioning brain, hers mostly, of course, ready for another thrilling day of making sure tourists don't try to take selfies with bears, Laura quipped as she shouldered her pack. I chuckled, double-checking my first aid kit. Hey, someone's got to keep Yogi and Boo Boo in line. Did you hear about the group that tried to feed a skunk last week? Laura grimaced. Oh yeah, that ended about as well as expected. I still can't get the smell out of my nostrils. As we set off down the trail, leaving behind the bustling visitor center, Laura couldn't resist unleashing her latest joke. Hey Zeke, did you hear about the mathematician who's afraid of negative numbers? I braced myself, knowing resistance was futile. No, Laura, I didn't. Do tell. He'll stop at nothing to avoid them. She grinned, clearly pleased with herself. I groaned, shaking my head. Your jokes are like the park's compost heap, Laura, ripe and recycled. She laughed, undeterred. Ah, but like compost, they help things grow. In this case, your appreciation for quality humor. As we hiked deeper into the park, the sounds of chattering tourists faded away, replaced by the subtle symphony of the forest. The trail narrowed, winding its way through stands of towering oaks and maples. The canopy above grew denser, dappling the forest floor with intricate patterns of light and shadow. Our destination was a less traveled path where a few campers had reported strange noises at night. Normally, such reports wouldn't raise much concern. Nocturnal animals often sound strange to city dwellers unused to the ways of the wild. But there had been an unusual frequency to these reports lately, all clustered around the same area. Probably just a bear with insomnia, I remarked as we veered off the main trail onto a narrower path. Or maybe a particularly vocal owl with a grudge against campers. Laura nodded, her usual joking demeanor replaced by a more serious expression. Maybe. But remember that deer carcass we found last month? The one that looked like it had been torn apart by something big? I did remember, and the memory sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. We had written it off as a bear attack at the time, but something about the way the animal had been mauled had seemed off. The wounds were too precise, too calculated for a typical predator. As we pressed deeper into the less traveled sections of the park, an uneasy feeling began to settle over me. The forest, usually alive with the sounds of birds and small creatures, seemed unnaturally quiet. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our boots and the occasional groan of branches swaying in the wind. "You notice how quiet it is?" Laura whispered, voicing my own thoughts. I nodded, my hand instinctively moving to rest on the bear spray attached to my belt. Yeah, it's like Mother Nature hit the mute button. We pushed on, the trail becoming rougher and less defined. The trees here were older, their gnarled branches reaching out like arthritic fingers, creating a claustrophobic canopy above us. The air grew cooler, and a thin mist began to gather around our feet, adding an ethereal quality to the already eerie atmosphere. After about an hour of hiking, we reached a small clearing. What we found there stopped us in our tracks. An abandoned campsite lay before us, but it was unlike any I had seen in my years as a ranger. The tent was shredded, its fabric hanging in tatters. Personal belongings were scattered across the clearing as if a tornado had torn through the site. A backpack lay nearby, ripped open, its contents strewn about. Laura knelt to examine claw marks on a nearby tree. "Looks like a bear got here," she remarked, but her tone lacked conviction. I joined her, studying the marks. Something felt off. The claw marks were unusually high, far higher than any black bear in the region could reach. And the spacing, it didn't match any animal I knew. "That's odd," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Black bears around here don't get that tall." Laura attempted to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's a bear on stilts. The circus is in town after all." I forced a chuckle. Either that or Bigfoot finally decided to go camping. We cataloged the site, took photographs, and collected what we could. I radioed back to the station to report our findings. Our supervisor, Frank Reeves, instructed us to keep investigating but to stay alert. As we moved on from the clearing, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees pressed closer, their branches intertwining overhead to block out more of the sky. The mist thickened, curling around our ankles like ghostly tendrils. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent my heart racing. I found myself constantly scanning our surroundings, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the shadows. Little did I know that this day would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. As we ventured further into the heart of Shenandoah, I couldn't have imagined the horrors that awaited us in the deceptive tranquility of these ancient Appalachian forests. As Laura and I pressed deeper into the less traveled areas of Shenandoah, the forest around us underwent a subtle but unmistakable transformation. The familiar trails and landmarks we had known for years seemed to shift and change, as if the very landscape was conspiring to disorient us. We reached a narrow ravine bridged by a fallen log. Below, a shallow stream trickled over moss-covered rocks, its gentle burbling the only sound in the oppressive silence of the forest. I went first, carefully balancing as I crossed. Laura followed, but halfway across she froze. "Zeke, do you smell that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I paused, inhaling deeply. There was a faint but unmistakable odor, acrid and unnatural. It reminded me of sulfur mixed with the sickly sweet scent of decay. "Yeah, I smell it. Maybe something died nearby." Laura grimaced. "Comforting thought, thanks for that." As we reached the other side of the ravine, something caught my eye. There, in a patch of soft soil, were a series of impressions unlike anything I'd seen in my years as a ranger. They were footprints, but not from any animal native to these woods. I knelt to examine them more closely, my heart pounding. The prints were elongated, easily twice the size of a human foot. But it was their shape that truly unnerved me. Each print had 4 toes, ending in sharp points that dug deep into the earth. Whatever had left these tracks walked on 2 legs, but it was certainly no bear or other known predator. "Okay, that's definitely not a bear," I said, my voice shaking slightly despite my efforts to remain calm. Laura snapped photos of the prints, her usual joking demeanor replaced by focused professionalism. "Could be a prank," she suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Some teenager with a homemade mold trying to spook hikers?" I shook my head. "Maybe, but why go through all that trouble out here? We're miles from any popular trails." We decided to follow the tracks, a decision that in hindsight would prove to be the beginning of our descent into a waking nightmare. As we moved forward, the strange prints led us further off the established paths and deeper into the untamed heart of the forest. The smell we had noticed earlier grew stronger, an omnipresent miasma that seemed to cling to our clothing and skin. The trees around us bore more of the high claw marks we had seen at the abandoned campsite, some so high up that whatever made them must have been able to reach well over 10 feet. "Feels like we're being herded," Laura observed, her voice tight with tension. I nodded, trying to keep my own growing unease in check. "Toward what, though?" Laura attempted a weak joke. "Probably a surprise party. Rangers of the Year awards, you know. I played along, grateful for any distraction from the oppressive atmosphere. Great, I hope they have cake. We reached another clearing, this one dominated by a massive ancient oak tree. Its gnarled branches reached out in all directions, creating a canopy that blocked out most of the fading daylight. At the base of the tree lay a sight that turned my blood to ice. The remains of a deer, or what was left of it, sprawled across the leaf-strewn ground. But this was no ordinary predator kill. The carcass was mutilated beyond recognition, deep gashes exposing bone and sinew. What struck me most was the precision of the wounds. This wasn't the frenzied attack of a hungry animal, but something far more deliberate and unsettling. Jesus, Laura breathed, her face pale. No animal does this. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. In all my years in these woods, I had never seen anything like this. It defied explanation, and that terrified me more than any known danger ever could. We should head back, I said, my mouth dry. Report this and get a team out here. Laura nodded, clearly as eager as I was to put some distance between us and this grisly scene. But as we turned to leave, a sound echoed through the trees that stopped us in our tracks. It was a low, rumbling noise that seemed to vibrate the very air around us. It was unlike anything I had ever heard in nature, not the growl of a bear or the howl of a wolf, but something altogether alien and terrifying. "What was that?" Laura asked, her eyes wide with fear. I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Probably just the wind playing tricks," I said, though I didn't believe it for a second. The noise came again, closer this time. It wasn't the wind. It was more like the reverberation of heavy machinery, but there was no equipment for miles. Whatever was making that sound was alive, and it was moving towards us. "We need to move," I urged, grabbing Laura's arm. We retraced our steps, but something was wrong. The path we had taken seemed different, unfamiliar. Landmarks we had passed were gone, replaced by dense underbrush and towering trees that I was certain hadn't been there before. "Did we take a wrong turn?" Laura asked, her voice edged with panic. I shook my head, confusion and fear warring for dominance in my mind. "I don't think so. It's like the forest changed." Laura shot me an incredulous look. "Forests don't just rearrange themselves, Zeke." "Tell that to this one," I muttered. The rumbling noise followed us, sometimes distant, sometimes alarmingly near. Shadows flickered at the edge of our vision, but whenever we turned to look, there was nothing there. It was as if the forest itself was toying with us, leading us deeper into its twisted heart. "Maybe we should radio for help," Laura suggested, a tremor in her voice betraying her growing fear. I reached for my radio, but all I got was static. The device crackled and hissed, useless in the face of whatever strange forces were at work in these woods. "That's not good," I said, frustration and fear coloring my words. Laura attempted a weak smile. "Of course. The one time we need technology, it fails us. On the bright side, we won't have to file those tedious reports if we never make it back." I appreciated her attempt at humor, dark as it was. Desperate times call for desperate jokes, I guess. We pressed on, our pace quickening as the light began to fade. The thought of being out here after dark, with that thing stalking us, was more than I could bear. We broke into a jog, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly before us, each turn revealing only more trees, more shadows, more unknown dangers. Then we heard it, a scream, a man's voice, raw and terrified, echoing through the trees. Laura and I stopped dead in our tracks, exchanging a look of horror. Without a word, we both knew we had to investigate. Whatever personal fears we had were overshadowed by our duty as rangers and the possibility that someone else was in danger. We ran toward the sound, branches whipping at our faces as we crashed through the underbrush. Bursting through a thicket, we stumbled upon a scene that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Another ranger, Ben Morales, lay on the ground. His uniform was torn to shreds, and he clutched at his leg, which was bleeding profusely. The look of terror on his face made my blood run cold. "Ben, what happened?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He gasped, his words coming in pained bursts. "Something attacked me. It came out of nowhere, so fast, so strong." Laura ripped open her pack, pulling out the first aid kit. "We need to stop the bleeding," she said, her voice steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. As she worked on Ben's wounds, I scanned our surroundings, every sense on high alert. "Did you see what it was?" I asked, dreading the answer. Ben winced as Laura applied pressure to his leg. "It was huge," he said, his voice shaking. "Like a wolf, but bigger. And it walked on 2 legs sometimes." I exchanged a glance with Laura. A bipedal wolf-like creature? It sounded impossible, like something out of a horror movie. But after what we had seen today, I wasn't ready to dismiss anything. "Maybe you hit your head," I suggested gently, though I was starting to believe that something truly inexplicable was stalking these woods. Ben's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not crazy," he snapped. "It chased me. I think it got Sam." Laura's hands froze. "Sam's out here too?" Ben nodded weakly. He radioed for backup. I was closest. I muttered a curse under my breath. This was no longer just a strange wildlife situation. We were dealing with a genuine emergency, possibly multiple rangers down and an unknown predator unlike anything we had ever encountered. "We need to get back," I said, helping Ben to his feet. "Can you walk?" He grimaced but nodded. "I'll manage." We made slow progress, the forest now cloaked in deepening shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig kept us on edge. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being herded, driven toward some unknown destination by an intelligence that was anything but animal. As we moved, the forest grew even darker and more foreboding. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to snag our clothing. The mist that had been swirling around our feet earlier now rose higher, obscure. The mist that had been swirling around our feet earlier now rose higher, obscuring the path ahead and muffling sounds in an eerie way. Our progress was painfully slow, hampered by Ben's injury and our own growing exhaustion and fear. "Knock, knock," Laura whispered suddenly, her voice tight with tension. "Now's not the time," I hissed, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. But Ben, perhaps trying to distract himself from the pain, played along. "Who's there?" "Interrupting Ranger," Laura started, but I quickly cut her off with a sharp shh. We fell silent, straining our ears. In the distance I could hear something moving through the underbrush. It was too deliberate to be the random movements of wildlife, too heavy to be anything native to these woods. Ahead, the trees parted to reveal another clearing. In the center stood a figure that made my blood run cold. It was hunched over something on the ground, its massive form silhouetted against the dim light. "Is that Sam?" Ben whispered, hope and fear mingling in his voice. I squinted, trying to make out details in the fading light. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with growing horror that what we were looking at was no human. The figure was tall, easily over 7 feet, with limbs that were too long and bent at unnatural angles. It was covered in matted fur that gleamed dully in the twilight, giving it an otherworldly appearance. As we watched, frozen in terror, the creature lifted its head. I caught a glimpse of a snout filled with sharp teeth, blood dripping from its maw. Its eyes reflected what little light remained, glowing with an eerie, intelligent malevolence. "That's definitely not Sam," I breathed, my voice barely audible. The creature let out a sound that defied description, a mix between a howl and a roar that sent chills through my entire body. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, a sound that spoke of ancient hunger and primal rage. "Run!" Laura hissed, already backing away. We turned to flee, but Ben stumbled, his injured leg giving out. The noise was enough to alert the creature. Its head snapped in our direction, those glowing eyes fixing on us with predatory focus. "Go!" I shouted, grabbing Ben under the arm to support him. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth or direction. All that mattered was putting distance between us and that monstrosity. I could hear it pursuing us, its heavy footfalls gaining ground with terrifying speed. "Any brilliant ideas?" Laura shouted as we ran. "Just one," I replied, my lungs burning. "Don't get caught." "Solid plan," she shot back, a hint of her usual sarcasm breaking through the fear. We burst into another clearing, and I felt a surge of hope. An old fire tower stood before us, its metal frame a beacon of potential safety. "Up there," I pointed, already angling towards it. We scrambled up the stairs, the metal structure shaking under our combined weight and the force of our desperate ascent. Reaching the top, we pulled up the ladder just as the creature emerged from the tree line. It circled below, those unnatural eyes never leaving us. It let out another of those bone-chilling roars, then began to claw at the tower's legs. The entire structure swayed alarmingly. "How long do you think this will hold?" Ben asked, his face pale with pain and fear. Laura, ever the optimist even in dire situations, quipped, "Long enough for us to regret our life choices, I hope." I scanned the small cabin at the top of the tower, looking for anything we could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on an old flare gun tucked away in a dusty corner. "There's a flare gun here," I announced, grabbing it and checking to see if it was loaded. "Maybe it enjoys fireworks," Laura said, her voice strained. I nodded grimly. Better than nothing. Loading the flare gun, I moved to the edge of the platform. The creature was still circling, occasionally rearing up to slash at the tower's supports. I took aim, steeling myself. "Hey, ugly!" I shouted. As it looked up, I fired. The flare arced through the air, striking the creature's shoulder. It burst into bright sparks, momentarily illuminating the clearing in harsh red light. The monster howled in pain and rage, retreating into the shadows of the surrounding forest. "Well, that bought us some time," Laura said, peering into the darkness below. "Time for what?" Ben asked, slumped against the railing. "We're still stuck up here." I grabbed the radio, hoping against hope that the height of the tower would help boost the signal. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Ranger Harper. We are under attack by an unknown creature. Request immediate assistance at the old fire tower near Marker 12. For a moment there was only static. Then, miraculously, a voice crackled through. "Copy that, Harper. This is Reeves. Hold tight. We're dispatching a team." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. We still had to survive until help arrived, and I had no doubt that the creature was still out there, waiting. The minutes crawled by like hours as we huddled in the tower, straining our eyes and ears for any sign of the monster's return. The forest below was eerily quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath. "I once thought the scariest thing in these woods was a raccoon with an attitude," I said, trying to break the tension. Laura managed a weak smile. "Remind me to file a complaint about the lack of monsters ahead signs." Just then we heard a welcome sound. Sirens in the distance, followed by the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades. A searchlight pierced through the canopy, sweeping over the clearing. "Over here," we shouted and waved frantically. As the light passed over us, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the clearing. The creature had reappeared, its eyes reflecting the harsh light. It snarled, a sound of frustration and rage, before melting back into the shadows of the forest. A team of rangers and local law enforcement arrived, weapons drawn and flashlights sweeping the area. Frank Reeves, our supervisor, called up to us. "Are you all okay?" "Been better," I called back, relief evident in my voice. "But we're alive." As they secured the area and helped us down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. We had survived, yes, but at what cost? And what exactly was that creature that had stalked us through the forest? Little did I know this night was just the beginning of a mystery that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and the ancient forests of Shenandoah. The next few days passed in a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. Ben was hospitalized for his injuries, while Laura and I were subjected to a battery of tests and interviews. The official investigation was in full swing, but I could tell from the skeptical looks and carefully worded questions that many doubted our account of what had happened in the forest. Frank Reeves, our supervisor, called Laura and me into his office 3 days after the incident. As we settled into the chairs across from his desk, I couldn't help but notice how tired he looked. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually neat appearance was disheveled. "I'm going to be straight with you two," he began, his voice grave. "What you've reported, it's unprecedented. We've had our share of strange occurrences in the park, but nothing like this." I leaned forward, hope rising in my chest. "So you believe us?" Reeves sighed, rubbing his temples. "I believe that you believe what you saw. But Zeke, Laura, you have to understand how this sounds to everyone else. A giant bipedal creature that can seemingly disappear into the forest. It's unbelievable," Laura finished for him, her voice tight. "We know how it sounds, Frank, but we know what we saw." "And what about the evidence?" I added. "The tracks, the claw marks, Ben's injuries." Reeves nodded slowly. We're analyzing everything. The forensics team is going over the sites you reported, and we've got wildlife experts examining the tracks and other physical evidence. But so far, nothing conclusive. I felt a surge of frustration. What about Sam? Has there been any sign of him? A shadow passed over Reeves' face. No, we've had search teams combing the area, but nothing. It's like he vanished into thin air. The implications of that statement hung heavy in the air. Sam was an experienced ranger, someone who knew the park like the back of his hand. For him to disappear without a trace. So what happens now? Laura asked, breaking the tense silence. Reeves leaned back in his chair. For now, we're keeping this under wraps. The official story is that there was an animal attack, possibly a bear. We don't need panic spreading among the visitors or the local community. I started to protest, but Reeves held up a hand to stop me. I know, Zeke, but until we have more concrete evidence, we can't go public with tales of unknown creatures in the park. It would cause chaos. As much as I hated to admit it, I knew he was right. But the thought of keeping quiet, of pretending that nothing out of the ordinary had happened, sat like a lead weight in my stomach. What about us? Laura asked. Are we going back on duty? Reeves nodded. Yes, but not in the back country. I'm assigning you both to visitor center duty for the next few weeks. I think some time away from the deep woods might do you good. I wanted to argue, to insist that we needed to be out there searching for answers. But the exhaustion of the past few days caught up with me, and I found myself nodding in agreement. As we left Reeves's office, Laura turned to me. Visitor center duty? Seriously? We should be out there, Zeke. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I know, Laura, but maybe Reeves is right. We need to regroup, gather our thoughts, and who knows, maybe being at the visitor center will give us a chance to hear if any visitors have had strange experiences. Laura nodded reluctantly. I suppose, but I don't like it. It feels like we're abandoning Sam. The mention of our missing colleague sent a pang of guilt through me. We're not abandoning him, I said, trying to convince myself as much as Laura. The search teams are still out there, and we'll keep our ears to the ground. If there's any news, any strange reports, we'll be the first to know. The next few weeks passed slowly. Laura and I fell into a routine at the visitor center, answering questions about hiking trails and campsite availability. But beneath the surface of normalcy, tension simmered. Every time a visitor mentioned hearing strange noises at night or seeing unusual tracks, my heart would race. But each report turned out to be nothing more than normal wildlife activity or overactive imaginations. One evening, as we were closing up the center, Laura approached me with a determined look in her eye. Zeke, we need to talk. I nodded, sensing the seriousness in her tone. We walked out to the parking lot, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I've been doing some research, Laura began, her voice low, looking into local legends, folklore about the park, and I found something interesting. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? She glanced around, as if afraid of being overheard. There are old stories going back generations about something in these woods. The locals called it the Shannon demon. I couldn't help but chuckle at the name, despite the seriousness of the situation. Shannon demon? Sounds like a bad B-movie monster. Laura shot me an exasperated look. I'm serious, Zeke. The descriptions in these stories, they match what we saw, a large bipedal creature that stalks the deep woods. There are accounts of missing hikers, mutilated animals, strange noises in the night. I felt a chill run down my spine. How far back do these stories go? Centuries, Laura replied. The Native American tribes in this area had legends about a malevolent spirit that roamed the forests. When European settlers arrived, they brought their own folklore that seems to have merged with the native stories. I leaned against my truck, trying to process this information. So you think what we encountered is some kind of, what? Cryptid? Urban legend come to life? Laura shook her head. I don't know what to think, but I do know that we can't just sit here handing out trail maps while that thing is out there. We need to investigate further. I nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement building in my chest. You're right, but we need to be smart about this. If Reeves finds out we're poking around... Then we don't let him find out, Laura said, a determined glint in her eye. We do this on our own time, off the books. As I agreed to Laura's plan, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping onto a path that would change our lives forever. The tranquil forests of Shenandoah had revealed a dark secret, and we were about to plunge headfirst into a mystery that had lurked in these ancient woods for centuries. Little did we know, our decision that evening would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge not only our understanding of the natural world, but also our very survival. The Shanann demon, if that's truly what we were dealing with, was about to become more than just a legend. It was about to become our waking nightmare. The weeks that followed our conversation in the parking lot were a blur of clandestine research and carefully planned excursions into the park's backcountry. Laura and I used our days off to venture deeper into the forests, always under the guise of routine patrols or personal hiking trips. We started by revisiting the areas where we had encountered the creature, meticulously documenting everything we found. The claw marks on the trees were still visible, though weathered by time and the elements. We took photographs, made plaster casts of the few tracks we could find, and collected samples of fur and other organic material we discovered. Our off-duty hours were spent poring over old records, local history books, and online forums dedicated to cryptozoology and unexplained phenomena. The more we dug, the more we realized that the legend of the Shanann demon was more widespread than we had initially thought. One crisp autumn evening, about a month into our covert investigation, Laura and I met at a small diner just outside the park boundaries. The place was nearly empty, save for a few tired-looking truckers nursing cups of coffee at the counter. "Look at this," Laura said as soon as I slid into the booth across from her. She pushed a stack of printouts towards me. I leafed through the papers, my eyes widening as I took in the information. They were reports of missing persons cases in and around Shenandoah National Park, dating back decades. "There's a pattern here," Laura explained, her voice low and intense. "Every few years there's a spike in disappearances, always in the same general area of the park, always during the late fall or early winter months." I nodded slowly, the implications sinking in. "And let me guess, the official explanations are always the same. Animal attacks, hikers getting lost?" Laura tapped her nose. "Exactly, but look at this." She pulled out a map of the park covered in red dots. Each dot represents a disappearance or a reported sighting of something unusual. See how they cluster? I leaned in, studying the map. The red dots formed a rough circle around a remote area of the park, a section so dense and rugged that even experienced hikers rarely ventured there. "It's like it has a territory," I murmured, a chill running down my spine. Laura nodded grimly. "That's what I was thinking, and look at this." She pointed to a spot near the center of the circle. "There's an old fire road here, abandoned decades ago. It leads to an area that used to be used for logging back in the early 1900s. I raised an eyebrow. "You think that's where it lives?" "I think it's worth checking out," Laura replied, a determined glint in her eye. I sat back, running a hand through my hair. The rational part of my mind was screaming that this was madness, that we were chasing shadows and letting our imaginations run wild. But I couldn't shake the memory of that night in the forest, the sight of that monstrous figure hunched over its prey. "When do we go?" I asked, knowing I'd regret the words even as I spoke them. Laura's face lit up with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "I was thinking this weekend. We both have Saturday and Sunday off. We can tell Reeves we're doing some backcountry camping, clear our heads after everything that's happened." I nodded slowly, already feeling a mix of anticipation and dread building in my chest. "Okay, but we need to be prepared. This isn't like our usual patrols." Laura agreed, and we spent the next hour planning our expedition. We would pack enough supplies for 3 days, just in case. Heavy-duty camping gear, extra batteries for our flashlights, and emergency flares were all added to our list. I also decided to bring my personal hunting rifle, something I rarely carried on regular park duty. As we left the diner, the cool night air filled with the chirping of crickets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to cross a line. This was no longer just an investigation. It felt like we were gearing up for a confrontation. The days leading up to our expedition passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. When Saturday morning finally arrived, Laura and I met at a remote trailhead, our packs loaded and our nerves on edge. "Ready for this?" Laura asked as we did one final gear check. I took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of trees before us. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, its depths hiding untold secrets. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. We set off down the overgrown trail, the sounds of civilization quickly fading behind us. The path was rough, barely visible in some places, a testament to how rarely this area was visited. As we hiked, I found myself constantly scanning our surroundings, every snapping twig or rustling leaf sending a jolt of adrenaline through my system. By mid-afternoon, we had reached the old fire road Laura had identified. It was little more than a narrow cut through the forest now, nature having reclaimed much of the land. But it was still visible enough to follow, leading us deeper into the heart of the creature's supposed territory. As we walked, the forest around us seemed to change. The trees grew older, more gnarled, their branches twisting together overhead to create a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The air grew cooler, and a light mist began to gather around our feet. "Does something feel off to you?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. There was a heaviness to the air, a sense of watchfulness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if the forest itself was aware of our presence and was not happy about our intrusion. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, we decided to make camp for the night. We found a small clearing just off the old fire road and quickly set up our tent. As we sat around our small campfire, eating a dinner of trail mix and beef jerky, neither of us spoke much. The weight of our mission and the potential dangers we faced hung heavy in the air. It was well past midnight when I was jolted awake by a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around us, followed by a high-pitched keening that made my blood run cold. "Laura," I hissed, reaching for my rifle. "Wake up." She was already stirring, her eyes wide in the darkness of the tent. "What was that?" "I don't know," I replied, but it was close. We listened intently, hardly daring to breathe. For several long minutes there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night. Then, just as I was beginning to think I had imagined it, the sound came again, closer this time. "We need to move," I said, already starting to pack up our gear as quietly as possible. Laura nodded, her face pale in the faint moonlight that filtered through the tent fabric. We worked quickly and silently, years of ranger training kicking in despite our fear. As we emerged from the tent, the forest around us seemed alive with shadows. Every tree, every bush could have been hiding our unseen stalker. We doused our fire and shouldered our packs, moving back to the old fire road with as much stealth as we could muster. We had only gone a few hundred yards when Laura suddenly grabbed my arm, pointing ahead. There, in the middle of the overgrown road, stood a figure that made my heart stop. It was the creature we had seen that night weeks ago, but seeing it here in the pale moonlight was a whole different level of terrifying. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its body a mass of matted fur and rippling muscle. But it was the face that truly chilled me to the bone. It was a twisted parody of something almost human, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stood frozen, locked in a staring contest with a monster out of nightmare. Then, with a roar that shook leaves from the trees, it charged. "Run!" I yelled, shoving Laura ahead of me. We crashed through the underbrush, all attempts at stealth abandoned in our desperation to escape. I could hear the creature behind us, its heavy footfalls gaining ground with terrifying speed. As we ran, the forest around us seemed to come alive. Branches whipped at our faces, roots reached up to trip us. It was as if the very land was working against us, trying to deliver us into the clutches of the monster that pursued us. Ahead, I spotted a break in the trees, a steep ravine cutting across our path. Without slowing, I grabbed Laura's hand and pulled her towards it. "We have to jump." She nodded, understanding immediately. As we reached the edge, we leapt, sailing through the air for a heart-stopping moment, before crashing into the thick underbrush on the other side. We tumbled down the slope, coming to a stop in a tangle of limbs and leaves. For a moment we lay there, gasping for breath, listening for any sign of pursuit. The forest had gone eerily silent. No sign of the creature, no sound of it crashing through the underbrush after us. Just the pounding of our hearts and the rustle of leaves in the gentle night breeze. As we slowly got to our feet, checking for injuries, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. We had escaped, yes, but we had also confirmed our worst fears. The Shanann demon was real, and it was far more terrifying than any legend could have prepared us for. What we had stumbled into was beyond anything we had been trained for, beyond anything we could have imagined. As we gathered our scattered gear and tried to get our bearings, I knew that our lives had been irrevocably changed. The tranquil forests of Shenandoah would never look the same to me again, and the horrors we had witnessed would haunt us long after this night was over. Little did we know, our ordeal was just beginning. The creature was out there, watching, waiting, and it had marked us as its prey. As dawn broke, casting an eerie glow through the misty forest, Laura and I found ourselves huddled in the hollow of an ancient oak tree. Our bodies ached from the night's frantic escape, and our minds reeled from what we had witnessed. The forest around us was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what might come next. "We need to get back to civilization," Laura whispered, her voice hoarse. "Report what we've seen." I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. "And tell them what exactly? That we went off on our own to hunt a mythical creature and nearly got ourselves killed? Reeves will have our badges." Laura's eyes flashed with determination. "We have evidence now, Zeke. We both saw it, clear as day, and I managed to snap a few photos before we ran." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You got pictures? When?" "Just before it charged," she replied, pulling out her camera with shaking hands. "I don't know how good they are, but it's something." We huddled over the camera's small screen, flicking through the images. Most were blurry, the result of panicked hands and poor lighting. But one stood out. It wasn't perfectly clear, but there was no mistaking the towering figure, its eyes reflecting the camera flash in an unnatural, piercing glow. "This changes everything," I breathed, a mixture of excitement and fear coursing through me. As we made our way back towards the ranger station, exhausted and on edge, we discussed our next steps. We knew we had to report our findings, but we also knew that without more concrete evidence, we might not be believed. Upon our return, we were immediately summoned to Reeves's office. His face was a mask of anger and concern as we recounted our unauthorized expedition and showed him the photographic evidence. "I ought to fire both of you on the spot," he growled, but there was a hint of fear in his eyes as he studied the photos. "But given what you've brought back, we need to handle this carefully." Over the next few weeks, a covert operation was put into place. Wildlife experts, cryptozoologists, and even a few government agents descended on Shenandoah National Park. The official story was that of a routine wildlife survey, but those of us who knew the truth could feel the tension in the air. It was on a cold November evening when everything came to a head. Laura and I were part of a team doing a night patrol in the creature's territory when our radios crackled to life. "All units, we have a visual. Sector 7, approach with extreme caution." My heart raced as we converged on the location, and there it was, illuminated by our flashlights, the Shanann demon in all its terrifying glory. It roared, a sound that shook the very ground beneath our feet, and charged. What followed was chaos. Gunshots rang out, flashlights bobbed wildly in the darkness, and shouts of terror and pain filled the air. In the midst of it all, I found myself face to face with the creature. Its eyes, filled with an ancient alien intelligence, bore into mine. In that moment, I understood that this was no mere animal, but something far more complex and terrifying. The battle in the forest that night changed everything. The creature was eventually brought down, but not before it had claimed several lives. The aftermath was a whirlwind of government cover-ups, scientific studies, and heated debates about the nature of the creature and its origins. Laura and I were hailed as heroes by some and reckless fools by others. But as the dust settled and life in Shenandoah National Park slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, we found ourselves forever changed by our encounter with the unknown. Years have passed since that fateful night, and I still serve as a ranger in Shenandoah. But now, as I patrol the quiet trails and serene vistas, I carry with me the knowledge that the world is far stranger and more mysterious than most people realize. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow at dusk, reminds me of the thin veil that separates the world we know from the one we don't. To this day, rumors persist of other creatures lurking in the deep woods of Shenandoah, and sometimes, on quiet nights when the mist rolls in and the moon is high, I swear I can hear a distant otherworldly howl echoing through the ancient hills. It serves as a reminder that there are some mysteries that can never truly be solved, some secrets that the forest will always keep. As I stand at the overlook, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of Shenandoah, I can't help but wonder, what other secrets lie hidden in the heart of these ancient forests? And are we truly ready to face them? Black Mountain Wilderness isn't a place you'd find on most maps. It's a harsh, unforgiving stretch of land tucked away in the Mojave Desert, all rock formations and empty dry land that feels like the bones of the earth. My name's Garrett Boyd, and in 1996, at the age of 28, I found myself working the graveyard shift in this godforsaken place. I'm not a big-shot ranger. I've been doing this job for 5 years now, ever since I figured out college wasn't for me. The wilderness suits me more than fluorescent lights and office cubicles, that's for damn sure. But on nights like that one, I started to wonder if I made the right choice. Black Mountain doesn't draw the tourists like Yosemite or the Grand Canyon. In a way, I prefer it that way, keeps the weirdos out. Well, except me, I guess. But there's something about this place that gets under your skin, a feeling of ancient secrets buried beneath the sand and rock. The day everything changed started like any other. I arrived at the ranger station just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The air was still warm from the day's heat, but I knew it wouldn't last. Desert nights can be cold as hell, and I had my jacket ready. As I checked in, my supervisor, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, gave me my assignment for the night. "Garrett, I need you to check out the southern sector near that old mining site. We've had some reports of unusual activity out there." I raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Frank shrugged. "Probably just some kids messing around, but we need to check it out. You know how it is." I did know. In a place like Black Mountain, unusual activity could mean anything from illegal campers to drug runners. But something in Frank's tone made me uneasy. He wasn't telling me everything. As I headed out in my truck, the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, plunging the desert into darkness. The headlights cut through the night, illuminating the twisted shapes of Joshua trees and the occasional startled jackrabbit. The southern sector was one of the most remote areas of the park. The old mining site, abandoned in the 1940s long before I was born, was particularly difficult to reach. The trailhead was washed out, and the only way to get there was on foot. I parked my truck behind a ridge, out of sight from the main trail. As I grabbed my gear, flashlight, radio, first aid kit, and sidearm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The desert was too quiet, the stillness unnatural. Little did I know as I set off towards the mining site that this night would change everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. The secrets of Black Mountain Wilderness were about to reveal themselves, and I was woefully unprepared for what awaited me in the darkness. The moon hung low in the sky as I made my way towards the old mining site, its pale light doing little to illuminate the rugged terrain. The air was cold now, and I had my jacket zipped up tight. But it wasn't just the temperature that sent a chill down my spine. There was something off about the night. Now, the thing about working in a desert wilderness is you get used to weird sounds. Coyotes, snakes, hell, even the occasional feral dog. But this was different. I first heard it when I crossed over a ridge, the sound of something heavy moving across the dry brush. At first I chalked it up to the wind. It's amazing how the desert can trick you, but I know better than to trust my ears out here. Still, the sound didn't stop. It dragged, like someone was pulling a body through the dirt. I took out my flashlight, scanning the area, but all I could see were the shadows of Joshua trees, their twisted arms reaching up like skeletons clawing for the sky. The light didn't reach far. It never does in the desert. It's like the darkness eats it up. And that's when I smelled it. Not the usual scent of sagebrush or dry earth, but something rotten, metallic, like copper mixed with decay. I turned to head back to my truck, figuring maybe it was an old coyote carcass rotting nearby. But then I heard the dragging again. This time it was closer. Too close. I was standing there with a flashlight in one hand and my radio in the other, listening. A shuffling sound, almost human, but off. I couldn't tell if it was coming from my left or right, so I just stood there like an idiot, waiting for whatever was out there to make its next move. Then I heard a crack. Not a branch. There's not enough trees for that, but something solid snapping. I swung my flashlight around, the beam slicing through the dark. That's when I saw it. A figure hunched over, dragging something bulky behind it. I froze. My first thought was that it was some vagrant, maybe a drifter who had gotten lost out here. But as the light hit its back, I realized how wrong I was. This thing, whatever it was massive, covered in coarse fur that stuck to its body in clumps like it hadn't bathed in weeks, maybe months. Its arms were long, too long, dragging some poor creature along the ground. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Its legs bent the wrong way, backward like a bird, and they were thick, muscular, built for running. This thing wasn't natural, and it sure as hell wasn't human. I tried to move, but I felt rooted to the spot. My brain was screaming at me to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't respond. It didn't make any noise. No growls, no hisses, just the sound of its feet dragging along the dirt as it slowly shifted the weight of whatever it was pulling. I finally snapped out of my shock and stumbled back, trying to grab my radio to call for backup, but my hand was shaking too much to get a grip on it. The thing turned its head in my direction. I didn't get a good look at its face, but I saw enough to know I never wanted to. It had something in its mouth, something red and stringy. I gagged. The creature turned its attention back to its task and started dragging its kill again. I don't know if it even noticed me or just didn't care. My feet finally found the courage to move, and I bolted back toward the ridge, sliding down loose rocks and kicking up dirt. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, heart pounding so hard in my chest I thought it might burst. I didn't stop until I saw the faint outline of my truck in the distance, headlights off, hidden behind the ridge line. I dove into the cab, slamming the door shut behind me. My fingers fumbled to get the keys into the ignition. For a few agonizing seconds, the engine wouldn't start, the truck sputtering like it wanted to die right there with me in it. I cursed under my breath, and just as I was about to lose it, the engine roared to life. I didn't wait to see if the thing followed me. I tore out of there like my life depended on it, which, at that moment, it probably did. As I drove through the wilderness, not stopping until I was back at the ranger station, my mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. But nothing made sense. How do you explain a creature that doesn't fit into anything you've ever known? It didn't belong in this world, yet there it was, dragging its prize through the desert. Little did I know this encounter was just the beginning. The horrors that awaited me in Black Mountain Wilderness were far beyond anything I could have imagined, and they were about to change my life forever. When I got back to the ranger station, I sat in the parking lot for what felt like hours, trying to catch my breath, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The events of the night replayed in my mind like a broken record, the dragging sound, the legs bending the wrong way, the way it had looked at me without seeing me. I thought about calling it in, telling someone what happened, but what the hell was I supposed to say? No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. So I sat there staring at the dashboard, wondering if maybe I'd lost it. Maybe the desert had finally driven me mad. But then I remembered the smell, that rancid metallic stench. That was real. That wasn't something you imagine. Finally, I mustered up the courage to go inside. Frank was still there, doing paperwork at his desk. He looked up as I walked in, his brow furrowing at the sight of me. "Garrett, you look like you've seen a ghost. Everything all right out there?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain what I'd seen? In the harsh fluorescent light of the station, it all seemed so impossible. I didn't find anything," I lied. "Just some coyotes making a racket. Probably what spooked the campers." Frank nodded, but I could tell he didn't quite buy it. "All right, well, write up your report and head on home. You look like you could use some rest." I nodded numbly and sat down at my desk. As I stared at the blank incident report form, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could tell the truth and risk being labeled as crazy, or I could lie and pretend nothing happened. In the end, I chose the latter. I filled out the form with a fabricated account of a routine patrol, signed it, and left it on Frank's desk. As I walked out of the station, I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. I was now carrying a secret that I couldn't share with anyone. For the next few nights, I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside my window made me jump. Every gust of wind or crack of a branch made me think it had followed me home. But the nights passed without incident, and eventually I convinced myself that whatever it was, it stayed out in the desert where it belonged. A couple of weeks later, I heard something on the radio about a missing hiker. They found his body, or what was left of it, not far from the old mining site. I knew right then what had happened, but I didn't say a word. The official report said he had been attacked by a mountain lion, that his injuries were consistent with a large predator. I let them believe that. It was easier for everyone that way. But I knew better. I drove out to the spot where they found the hiker, parked my truck, and sat there for a while, looking out at the barren landscape. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert. It was quiet, peaceful even. Hard to believe that something so awful could happen in a place like this. But I knew the truth. And that truth was far worse than anything I'd ever imagined. As I sat there, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the mountains, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. I was now privy to a secret that defied explanation, a horror that lurked in the shadows of this forgotten wilderness. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That creature, whatever it was still out there. And something told me that our paths would cross again. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. As I started my truck and began the drive back to the station, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth about what was happening in Black Mountain Wilderness, no matter the cost. Little did I know the price of that knowledge would be higher than I could ever have imagined. The desert might keep its secrets, but I was determined to unravel them. And in doing so, I was about to embark on a journey that would test the limits of my sanity and challenge everything I thought I knew about the world around me. In the weeks that followed my encounter with the creature, I found myself obsessed with uncovering the truth about what was happening in Black Mountain Wilderness. I spent my off hours combing through old reports, looking for any hint of similar incidents in the past. Most of what I found was mundane: lost hikers, minor injuries, the occasional wildlife sighting. But every now and then, I'd come across something that made my blood run cold. There were reports dating back decades of strange noises in the night, of campers going missing without a trace, of rangers encountering things they couldn't explain. Most of these incidents had been written off as the product of overactive imaginations or the harsh desert environment playing tricks on people's minds. But now I knew better. One afternoon, as I was poring over a dusty file from the 1970s, Frank caught me. "Garrett, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. I quickly closed the file, trying to act casual. Just, brushing up on some park history, for the job. Frank's eyes narrowed. He wasn't buying it. "Look, son, I know that night a few weeks back shook you up, but you need to let it go. Whatever you think you saw out there." "I know what I saw," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Frank sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Garrett, I've been working these parks for over 30 years. The desert, it does things to your mind, makes you see things that aren't there. Trust me, it's better to just forget about it and move on." But I couldn't forget, and I couldn't move on. The image of that creature was burned into my mind, and I knew I wouldn't rest until I understood what was really going on in this God-forsaken place. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in the park. Wildlife seemed scarcer, the nights quieter. It was as if the very land was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then one night, about a month after my encounter, I got my chance to dig deeper. I was assigned to patrol the eastern sector, an area not far from where I had first seen the creature. As I drove out into the darkness, my heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The eastern sector was even more desolate than the southern one. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the earth like the bones of some ancient, long-dead giant. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the landscape, turning familiar shapes into monstrous silhouettes. I parked my truck and set out on foot, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every sound, every movement in the shadows set my nerves on edge, but I pressed on, determined to find some answers. After about an hour of hiking, I came across something that made me stop in my tracks. There, in a small clearing, was a circle of stones. But these weren't just any stones. They were arranged in a precise pattern with strange symbols carved into their surfaces. As I approached, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air around the stone circle felt different, charged somehow, like the moment before a lightning strike. I knelt down to examine one of the stones more closely, running my fingers over the strange symbols. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the landscape. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, but when I blinked, it was gone. Heart pounding, I realized I had stayed out here too long. Whatever this stone circle was, whatever it meant, I knew I was in over my head. I needed help, someone who could make sense of what I had found. As I made my way back to my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and more than once I caught glimpses of something just at the edge of my vision. By the time I reached my vehicle, I was in a cold sweat. As I drove back to the ranger station, my mind raced with possibilities. What was that stone circle? Who had built it? And most importantly, what was its connection to the creature I had seen? I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. It was time to bring someone else in on the secret. But who could I trust? Who would believe me? As I pulled into the station parking lot, I made a decision. Tomorrow I would reach out to Dr. Eleanor Vance, a professor of anthropology at the nearby university. I had met her once at a park event, and I remembered her mentioning an interest in Native American artifacts. If anyone could help me make sense of what I had found, it was her. But little did I know, by bringing Dr. Vance into this, I was about to set in motion a chain of events that would lead us both into the heart of a mystery far darker and more ancient than either of us could have imagined. The secrets of Black Mountain Wilderness were beginning to unravel, and I was about to learn that some truths are better left buried in the desert sands. The next morning, I called Dr. Eleanor Vance's office at the university. After explaining that I had found something of potential archaeological interest in the park, she agreed to meet me that afternoon. I spent the intervening hours in a state of nervous anticipation, rehearsing how I would explain what I had seen without sounding like a complete lunatic. Dr. Vance arrived at the ranger station just after 2 p.m. She was a tall, slender woman in her early 50s, with sharp green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. As I led her to a private meeting room, I could feel her scrutinizing gaze on me. "So, Ranger Boyd," she began as we sat down, "you mentioned on the phone that you found something unusual. Can you elaborate?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Dr. Vance, before I show you what I found, I need to tell you about something that happened to me a few weeks ago. It's going to sound crazy, but I swear to you, every word of it is true." Over the next half hour, I recounted my encounter with the creature, as well as my discovery of the stone circle. To her credit, Dr. Vance listened without interruption, her expression remaining neutral throughout. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she nodded slowly. "Ranger Boyd, what you've described is extraordinary, but it's not entirely without precedent." My eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Dr. Vance leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "There are stories, ancient legends from the indigenous tribes of this area that speak of creatures not unlike what you've described. Beings that walk between our world and something else. The stone circle you found may be connected to these legends." She paused, studying my face. "I'd like to see this circle for myself. Can you take me there?" I nodded, relief washing over me. She believed me. Or at least, she was willing to consider the possibility that what I had seen was real. As we drove out to the eastern sector, Dr. Vance filled me in on some of the legends she had mentioned. The local tribe spoke of a time long ago when the desert was a different place, teeming with life and strange, powerful beings. But something happened, a great cataclysm that changed the land and drove these beings into hiding. According to the legends, Dr. Vance explained, there are still places where the veil between worlds is thin, places where these beings can cross over, if the conditions are right. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the unnatural stillness of the night I had encountered the creature. "And you think Black Mountain might be one of these places?" Dr. Vance nodded grimly. "It's possible. The geology of this area is unique. There are magnetic anomalies, unexplained energy readings. It's the kind of place where strange things tend to happen." As we neared the location of the stone circle, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The air seemed thicker somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Dr. Vance must have felt it too because she fell silent, her eyes scanning the landscape intently. We parked the truck and set out on foot. As we approached the clearing where I had found the circle, I noticed something odd. The vegetation seemed different, more lush, almost tropical. It was as if we had stepped into a completely different ecosystem. "This isn't right," I muttered, my hand instinctively moving to the sidearm at my hip. Dr. Vance nodded, her face pale. "The legends speak of this too, areas around the thin places, where reality itself seems to warp and change." As we entered the clearing, both of us stopped short. The stone circle was there, just as I had left it. But now, in the center of the circle, stood a tall, angular stone pillar that I was certain hadn't been there before. Dr. Vance approached it cautiously, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and academic excitement. "This is incredible. The markings on this pillar, they're unlike anything I've ever seen." I hung back, scanning the edges of the clearing. The feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever. Shadows seemed to move at the corner of my vision, and I could have sworn I heard whispers on the wind. "Dr. Vance," I said, my voice tight, "I think we should go. Something's not right here." She turned to look at me, her mouth open to protest. But before she could speak, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the clearing. It was a sound I recognized all too well. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Dr. Vance's arm and pulling her towards the path back to the truck. As we fled, I risked a glance back over my shoulder. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The creature from that night weeks ago was there, emerging from behind the stone pillar. But it wasn't alone. Two more of its kind flanked it, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. We ran faster than I thought possible, branches whipping at our faces as we crashed through the underbrush. Behind us, I could hear the creatures in pursuit, their inhuman howls echoing through the desert night. As we finally reached the truck, fumbling with the keys and practically diving inside, I realized that everything had changed. This was no longer just about me and what I had seen. We had stumbled upon something far bigger, far more dangerous than I could have imagined. As I gunned the engine and sped away from the site, Dr. Vance turned to me, her face pale and drawn. "Ranger Boyd," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think we may have just opened a door that was meant to stay closed." I nodded grimly, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The secrets of Black Mountain Wilderness were beginning to reveal themselves, and I had a sinking feeling that our lives would never be the same again. The drive back to the ranger station was tense and silent. Dr. Vance sat rigid in her seat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, while I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those creatures pursuing us. The adrenaline was slowly wearing off, leaving me shaky and nauseous. As we pulled into the station parking lot, I killed the engine but made no move to get out. For a long moment neither of us spoke, both still processing what we had just experienced. Finally, Dr. Vance broke the silence. "Ranger Boyd, Garrett," she said, her voice hoarse. "What we saw back there, it changes everything. We need to approach this carefully." I nodded, running a hand through my hair. "I know, but what do we do? Who do we tell?" She shook her head. "For now, no one. We need more information before we go public with this. If we start talking about interdimensional creatures and mystical stone circles, we'll be laughed out of our careers." I couldn't argue with that logic, but the thought of keeping quiet didn't sit well with me. "But what about the danger? Those things are out there, and they're not just wildlife. They're intelligent and they're hunting." Dr. Vance's expression was grim. "I know, but we need proof, hard evidence that can't be dismissed or explained away, and we need to understand what we're dealing with." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Vance and I met regularly, poring over ancient texts, local legends, and scientific papers on the geological oddities of the Black Mountain area. We were building a case, piece by piece, but it felt like for every question we answered, two more took its place. Meanwhile, strange occurrences in the park were becoming more frequent. Hikers reported odd noises and unexplained lights. Wildlife behaved erratically, and the atmosphere of the place seemed to change, becoming heavier, more oppressive. One night, about a month after our encounter at the Stone Circle, I was on a routine patrol when my radio crackled to life. "Garrett, you there?" It was Frank, and he sounded worried. "I'm here, Frank. What's up?" "We've got a situation. A group of campers just called in. They say something's stalking their campsite. Sounds big." My heart rate spiked. "Where?" "Sector 7 near Coyote Ridge. I'm heading out there now, but I could use backup." I swallowed hard. Sector 7 was close to where I'd first seen the creature. "I'm on my way, Frank. Be careful." As I sped towards Coyote Ridge, I debated calling Dr. Vance. But what could she do? This was happening now, and I didn't have time to wait for backup that might not believe what they were seeing. When I arrived at the campsite, Frank's truck was already there, but there was no sign of him or the campers. The tents were still up, but they had been shredded, their contents strewn about. The campfire was nothing but smoldering embers. "Frank?" I called out, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. "Frank, where are you?" That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the shadows beyond the campsite. I swung my flashlight in that direction and froze. There, at the edge of the light, stood one of the creatures. But this one was different. It was larger, its fur matted with what looked horribly like fresh blood, and in its elongated, clawed hand, it held Frank's ranger's hat. For a moment we stared at each other, neither moving. Then, with a speed that defied its size, it charged. I barely had time to draw my sidearm before it was upon me. I fired, the sound deafening in the quiet desert night. The creature stumbled but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar of pain and rage that shook me to my core. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear it behind me, its heavy footfalls gaining ground. I zigzagged between boulders and Joshua trees, trying to break its line of sight. Suddenly the ground gave way beneath me. I tumbled down a steep incline, rocks and thorny brush tearing at my clothes and skin. When I finally came to a stop, I found myself in a narrow ravine, hidden from view. I lay there, barely breathing, listening. Above, I could hear the creature moving about, searching. Its frustrated growls echoed off the canyon walls. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the sounds faded into the distance. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I climbed out of the ravine, battered and bruised, but alive. The campsite was deserted, with no sign of Frank, the campers, or the creature. I knew then that I couldn't keep this quiet any longer. Whatever was happening in Black Mountain Wilderness, it was escalating. People were missing, possibly dead, and I was in way over my head. As I drove back to the ranger station, my mind raced. It was time to bring in outside help, consequences be damned. But little did I know the true horror of what we were facing was only just beginning to reveal itself. The secrets of Black Mountain were unraveling, and the price of knowledge was about to become terrifyingly clear. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. As soon as I got back to the ranger station, I called Dr. Vance and filled her in on what had happened. She agreed it was time to go public with what we knew. We contacted the local authorities, the FBI, and even reached out to a few trusted journalists. At first, we were met with skepticism and disbelief, but as more people went missing and strange sightings increased, the tide began to turn. A task force was assembled, combining local law enforcement, federal agents, and scientific experts. Dr. Vance and I found ourselves at the center of it all, trying to explain the unexplainable. The park was closed to the public, and a perimeter was established around the area where we had encountered the creatures. Helicopters buzzed overhead and teams of armed personnel combed the desert. It was surreal, watching the quiet wilderness I had come to know transform into a militarized zone. 5 days after the incident at the campsite, we made our first major breakthrough. A team exploring a series of caves near the stone circle discovered what appeared to be an underground complex of tunnels and chambers. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols we had seen on the stones, and there were signs of recent activity. As we delved deeper into the complex, the air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Dr. Vance, who was part of the exploration team, looked pale and shaken. "This place," she whispered to me as we moved through a particularly narrow passage. "It's not natural. The geology, the atmosphere, it's as if reality itself is warped here." I nodded grimly, my hand tightening on my rifle. We had been issued military-grade weapons after the encounter at the campsite, but in the face of what we were dealing with, they felt woefully inadequate. As we emerged into a large circular chamber, everyone stopped short. In the center of the room stood a structure that defied description. It was like a pillar of swirling energy, pulsing with colors that hurt to look at directly. Around its base were more of the creatures we had encountered, but they were different, more human-like in appearance, yet still undeniably alien. They turned to face us as we entered, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly intelligence. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the creatures stepped forward and, to our shock, spoke. "You have come," it said, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to echo in our minds rather than our ears. "The cycle nears its end. The merging begins." Before anyone could respond, the pillar of energy pulsed violently. The air crackled with electricity, and I felt a sensation like the world was being torn apart around us. The creatures began to chant in a language that hurt to hear, their forms shifting and changing as the energy from the pillar washed over them. "Fall back!" I yelled, grabbing Dr. Vance and pulling her towards the exit. But it was too late. The pillar exploded in a blinding flash of light, and I felt myself being thrown backwards. As I lost consciousness, my last thought was that we had stumbled upon something far beyond our understanding, and that the consequences of our discovery might be more terrible than we could have ever imagined. When I came to, I was lying on the desert floor outside the cave entrance. The sky above was a swirling mass of unnatural colors, and the air felt thick and strange. As I struggled to my feet, I saw that the landscape had changed. Bizarre alien vegetation had sprouted from the once barren ground, and in the distance I could see structures that defied the laws of physics. Dr. Vance was nearby, helping others to their feet. Her face was a mask of shock and awe. "Garrett," she said as I approached, I think we've triggered some kind of interdimensional event. The barrier between our world and whatever is on the other side, it's breaking down." As if to punctuate her words, a massive otherworldly creature soared overhead, its multiple wings casting strange shadows on the transformed landscape below. I realized then that we were no longer dealing with just a local phenomenon. The secrets of Black Mountain had been unleashed, and the world as we knew it would never be the same. We had opened a door that was never meant to be opened, and now we had to face the consequences of our actions. As more alien creatures began to emerge from the cave and strange energies coursed through the air around us, I knew that the real battle was just beginning. The fate of our world hung in the balance, and we were the ones who had tipped the scales. The horrors of Black Mountain Wilderness had been revealed, and now they were spilling out into the world beyond. Whatever happened next, I knew that my life and the lives of everyone on Earth had been irrevocably changed by the secrets we had unearthed in this forgotten corner of the desert. The days that followed the incident at the cave were a blur of chaos and confusion. The phenomenon that had begun in Black Mountain Wilderness spread rapidly, transforming the landscape and altering the very fabric of reality around us. The military quarantined a vast area, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. Reports flooded in from around the globe of similar occurrences. Strange creatures appearing in city streets, bizarre plant life sprouting in suburban backyards, and inexplicable weather patterns that defied all known meteorological models. The world was changing, and humanity was struggling to adapt. Dr. Vance and I found ourselves at the forefront of efforts to understand and contain what was happening. We worked tirelessly with scientists, military personnel, and even mystics and occultists, trying to make sense of the new reality we had inadvertently unleashed. It's like the walls between dimensions are crumbling, Dr. Vance explained during one particularly tense briefing with government officials. What we're seeing is a merging of our world with something else, something ancient and utterly alien to our understanding. I watched the faces of the men and women around the table, seeing the fear and disbelief in their eyes. They were leaders, decision-makers, people used to being in control. But in the face of this, they were as lost as the rest of us. As the weeks turned into months, a new normal began to emerge. People adapted as they always do. Communities formed around the changed areas, studying the new flora and fauna, learning to navigate the altered landscapes. Some even began to develop abilities, psychic powers, physical transformations, as if the human body and mind were evolving to match our new environment. But it wasn't all peaceful coexistence. Conflicts arose between those who embraced the changes and those who fought against them. Religious groups declared it the end times, while others saw it as a new beginning for humanity. Governments struggled to maintain order in a world where the laws of physics could no longer be relied upon. Through it all, I continued my work in what was left of Black Mountain Wilderness. The park, now at the epicenter of the change, had become a focal point for research and exploration. Each day brought new discoveries, new horrors, and new wonders. One evening, about a year after that fateful night in the cave, I stood at the edge of what we now called the merger zone, the area where the boundaries between our world and the other were at their thinnest. The sky above swirled with impossible colors, and creatures that defied description soared through the air. Dr. Vance joined me, her once dark hair now streaked with white from the stress of the past year. "Quite a view, isn't it?" she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of awe and sadness. I nodded, unable to find the words to express the tumult of emotions inside me. Guilt, wonder, fear, and a strange sort of excitement all warred for dominance. "Do you ever wonder," I asked after a long moment, "if we did the right thing, bringing this to light?" Dr. Vance was quiet for a time, her eyes fixed on the horizon where our world blended seamlessly into the alien landscape beyond. "I don't think we had a choice, Garrett," she said finally. "This was coming whether we uncovered it or not. At least this way we had some warning, some chance to prepare." I knew she was right, but it didn't ease the weight of responsibility I felt. My actions, my curiosity, had played a part in changing the world forever. For better or worse, the human race was on a new path, one that led into unknown territory. As we stood there, watching the sun set in a sky that no longer looked familiar, I realized that our journey was far from over. The secrets of Black Mountain had been revealed, but they had only opened the door to greater mysteries. What lay ahead for humanity was uncertain, filled with both peril and possibility. The quiet, forgotten wilderness I had once patrolled was gone, replaced by a frontier that stretched beyond the limits of our understanding. And as I looked out over this new world, I knew that despite the dangers, despite the fear, I would continue to explore, to seek answers, and to face whatever new horrors and wonders awaited us in this transformed reality. The end of one story had become the beginning of another, vaster and stranger than anything I could have imagined. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the merger zone, I knew that the creatures that had started it all were waiting, watching, perhaps preparing for the next phase of a plan beyond human comprehension. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain: the world would never be the same, and the adventures and horrors were only just beginning.